My mom tells me not to have so much hate in my heart, but I can't help it. I've seen too much. Between countless wars and loss of human life for really no other reason other than greed, to like every other human-made social crisis, like global housing and climate going to absolute shit. I just can't. I hate it here. And I'm pissed and I'm tired and I know I'm not the only one. I'm Jed, by the way. 2 years ago, I got sick. Very sick. A sickness that to this day remains not only just as active and painful for me as it did at the very beginning, but equally a big old question mark to every doctor slash specialist that I've seen up to this point, in and out of my home country, which is Canada. And look, I wouldn't be hopping onto my computer to talk about my unique experience if I didn't also observe the very same thing happening to so many other people around me, from loved ones to acquaintances to random strangers on the internet. And no, we're not all sick with the same illness, but I can tell you one thing, we've all received similar ways of care or a lack thereof. In fact, I'll even go as far as to say that the Canadian healthcare system, the way it's set up, the way it works, what it prioritizes, the circles, once you go through it, it makes things worse for a sick person. So much worse. And I just want to preface this video by saying that I'm not here to compare the situation in Canada with other countries. I recognize that what I'm going to speak about is but a microcosm of a global set of messed up and outdated systems that need to be destroyed. And of course, there are degrees in the severity of these issues. But this is what I know based on my personal experience with a country that internationally is wrongfully hyped up for their seemingly utopic universal healthcare situation. This is a country that is actively involved in the decision-making of dire humanitarian care at the international level, that literally determines whether people live or die. And my question is, if Canada's very own healthcare system is failing, how can we possibly trust their judgment and leadership? I don't say it lightly when I say that the only reason that I'm alive right now is not because of the Ontario healthcare system, Ontario being my home province. The only reason that I am speaking to you is because of my friends and family and an accommodating and understanding job. In other words, a solid as fuck support system that has carried me through my darkest hours, that I am privileged to have. And I make sure to use the word privileged because I know there are so many other people in the exact same position as me who are not as lucky to have the personal supports. And my heart honestly breaks for them because instead of having a healthcare system that is there to, I don't know, provide care, it's failing them miserably and they end up falling through the cracks. And it's not fair. And it's exactly why I'm speaking up. Before I continue, I do want to provide a content warning as I do speak about mental health and suicide a bit later on. So please, without further ado, as I know you probably have many places to be and people to see, and I want to respect your time by keeping this to the point, I call this story, my story, a story about a stupid, desperate decision and the systemic failure that followed. Okay, so first some context. About 3 years ago, at the age of 25, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. I won't get into the lead up to this today as it's a journey in and of itself. What I will say is that with this diagnosis came a really big sense of relief for me because I'd basically been living with depression, anxiety, and just general emotional turmoil for a very long time since I was young. So yeah, I'm given this diagnosis by a psychiatrist that I was lucky enough to access through my university at the time, and I'm basically put on several different antipsychotic medications over the course of about half a year with the goal of essentially trying to find the right fit. Finally, around October 2021, my psychiatrist and I land on a little drug called Seroquel. At first, Seroquel is a godsend. Suddenly, I'm like, holy shit, this is what it's supposed to feel like. No more constant anxiety, and I'm in this happy-go-lucky yet grounded, keyword being grounded, state. It was incredible, and I was really happy for a time with this medication because for the first time ever, it felt like I was in control of my brain and my emotions that tended to take over. So yeah, things were going great for several months until the end of February 2022. This is where things start going downhill for me. During this time, I go through something very traumatic, which essentially catapults me into this very intense episode of heightened anxiety that lasts for months. I was having extreme acid reflux, frequent panic attacks as well. Most alarmingly, I'd say, were the very violent heart palpitations that would happen right as I would fall asleep every single night. I was a mess, essentially. And the worst part of it was that I couldn't figure out what was causing it. And neither could any of the medical professionals that were around me, which basically consisted of a walk-in doctor and a couple ER doctors that saw me, as I didn't have a family doctor at the time. As well, I also had a new consultation-based psychiatrist who we'll call Dr. X, that I was referred to after graduating from a master's program and losing access to the psychiatric services there at my university. With blood work and ECGs coming back normal, none of them could tell me what was wrong. And yet I was still going through extremely worrying symptoms. The worst of them, again, being the very violent heart palpitations that had gotten to the point of making me terrified to go to sleep. By early May 2022, not only was I now in a crazed, desperate state, lucky for me, I also maxed out my sessions with Dr. X. Exactly a week after this is when I make the stupid, desperate decision to stop taking Seroquel, because in my flawed observation, I am now convinced that it's what's causing my symptoms. And if I take another dose at bedtime, I will die in my sleep. Now, I don't just stop taking Seroquel and go on with my life. At the beginning of starting antipsychotic/antidepressants, they tell you that you're not supposed to stop these medications cold turkey because it can cause a relapse of the symptoms, the psychiatric symptoms that they're treating. So in my case, this would have been a relapse of mania, anxiety, depression, and psychosis. So while I'm irrational, I'm also really scared. So what do? Together with my therapist, we come up with a safety plan for me to go to the ER and tell them exactly what has happened. That I've stopped taking my meds because I'm worried for my safety and I would like to speak to a psychiatrist for support and next steps. Now, from this point forward, I'm only going to detail this initial visit of mine to the ER because I think it's a wonderfully poetic foreshadowing of the almost 2-year fuckery that I've since endured at the hands of the Ontario healthcare system. So, upon heading to the ER, I am first greeted by a triage nurse who asks me about why I'm there, etc. I tell her that I'm bipolar, that I've just stopped taking my meds, and that I'm hoping to see a psychiatrist because I don't know what to do, and I'm really scared. Not only does she begin to interrogate me about my bipolar diagnosis, going as far as to, question it altogether just purely based on the dose that I was taking. On the dose of the medication that I was taking. She also scoffs at me when I mentioned that I hope to see a psychiatrist that night, which didn't feel very good. And in retrospect, I do wonder how that was appropriate in the context of someone seeking emergency care. I still don't really know. I couldn't tell you. But to be completely honest with you, while I did leave the triage office feeling really icky about what had just happened, I wholeheartedly also believed that it was a weird one-off thing. Maybe she wasn't having a good day. It finally took me waiting about 11 hours in the waiting room to then eventually see a doctor who examined me and then proceeded to inform me that I was, quote, not suicidal enough to see a psychiatrist that night, and that he wouldn't, at the very least, write me a referral back to Dr. X because I could, again, quote, call her back Monday and then they could reopen my file since it had only been a week. It took all of this for me to then wonder in horror, is this what getting help is going to be like? Is getting help going to be this difficult? Well, Emerge Doc, if you're listening, out of pure spite, I'll have you know that I indeed became suicidal that weekend as the inevitable withdrawal effects of Seroquel began to creep in. I'll also have you know that I did call Dr. X's office first thing Monday morning to ask them to reopen my file, only for them to tell me they had permanently closed it and then I would have to go through the entire system again with a referral, and the wait time to see a doctor would be anywhere between 12 to 18 months. By this point, not only was I in psychological agony, I also abruptly developed severe face and head nerve pain. A feeling that I can only describe as a constant twisting and spasm of every nerve ending and muscle as well, on the right side of my face, in my cheek, in my molars, the temporal region, the back of my head and neck. A constant pulling of nerves that, despite several ER and walk-in doctors telling me was all part of temporary withdrawal, never went away. Almost 2 years in, and it just never went away. And speaking of ERs, Emerge Doc, I'll also tell you that in total for the year of 2022, I probably went to the ER nearly 12 times, and consequently spent the equivalent of 3 or 4 days in waiting rooms, with my own personal record being a whopping 16 hours waiting in severe pain alongside dozens of other folks, because apparently there wasn't any ER doctor on duty that night. And some good news though, that particular 16-hour wait did result in me getting hospitalized for a week in the psychiatric unit, which, hey, finally fast-tracked me to a psychiatrist! A psychiatrist who could not tell me why I was experiencing such incessant, excruciating head and facial pain, despite it having started with the discontinuation of a psychiatric med. Her reasoning just wasn't in the literature, and there was no effort made to explore further. And so Emerge Doc then began the wild goose chase of sending me through randomized tests, a shit ton of medications and specialists, all with their own fair share of lengthy wait times and equally very fast disillusionment. I'm not going to get into every single heartbreak that I experienced with the system, otherwise this video would be like an hour long, and I don't want that, but I can tell you the highlights. Number 1. After being advised in this particular direction and waiting months for the referral, I finally saw a neurologist that I had put all my eggs in one basket for, you guys. He ordered an MRI of my head, and then in the follow-up proceeded to inform me that he couldn't help me any further since it was revealed that I didn't have a tumor, which was good news, obviously, but I was still in level 10 pain and not knowing why. And as I'll get into in a minute, turns out a neurologist's expertise does not end with tumors. Number 2, I mentioned at the beginning of this ordeal that I didn't have a family doctor because there is a huge shortage right now and people generally wait years to find one. I'm not entirely sure about other provinces, but my guess is that it's not so different for you guys either, but maybe you guys can let me know what the situation is for you in the comments or something. Regardless, I think we all know how crucial GPs are in coordinating care, and in this province specifically, without one, there are so many barriers to service when it comes to things like, seeing a specialist in the first place, the consequent treatment, supervision, and follow-up. Because of this, I turned to a telemedicine program that on paper, sounds great. It's free, you can connect to doctors for simple prescription refills and referrals if you're lucky enough to actually be seen. But as is the pattern generally in Canadian healthcare, these services are mostly only good for maintenance. The minute you're in crisis, you're also in big trouble. Over the course of the first 3 or 4 months of my situation, I saw multiple doctors on this website. Each of these doctors basically ordered blood tests. I'd say somewhere around 10 to 13 blood tests were ordered in total. Some of these doctors, I know I could feel and see were well-intentioned, but the problem was that there wasn't any follow-up. There was also no guarantee that you'd ever be able to see the same doctor again. They did provide the results on the website portal, but since I was really sick and not thinking clearly, it wasn't until it was much too late that I finally decided to check out these results myself. I'm not scientific at all, so my interpretation was limited. But what I could tell you was that they were basically testing the same things each time, which mostly came back normal. So you see why it's important for there to be follow-up, right? Because what was the point of each of them just testing the same things over and over again? These visits in their design just never progress past the preliminary stage. This leads us to number 3, aka the family doctor I finally got in late summer of 2022. And I tell y'all that I put my whole heart, trust, and patience in this man for almost a year and a half until I realized that he just wasn't in my corner the way a GP should be, and that the direction of my treatment was even more scrambled and drawn out under his care, which was a huge blow because I wanted nothing more than for a medical professional to hold my exhausted hand at that time. We ended up splitting ways this past November. It wasn't an easy decision by any means, but it was a necessary one for me. And finally, number 4, there was a psychiatrist who I was paired with after my hospitalization, who every doctor and specialist would point back to since the pain could be traced back to the discontinuation of Seroquel. This was a psychiatrist whose only answer remained that it was just not in the literature, and who made me feel like my pain was not real. To this psychiatrist, especially, I say, fuck you. Throughout all of this, no one could give me a clear answer as to what the hell happened to me in May 2022. No one could give me a diagnosis for my pain, let alone a solution, or even just a way to manage it. And look, I'm not one to automatically default to the injustices that come as a perk of my identity as a woman, as a Black person, as a mentally ill person. But I cannot help but take those things into account when reflecting on the way that my treatment has played out at the systemic level here. All these things that have always been textbook to me, things I learned about in theory in university, turns out they're real, you guys. And I don't think it's until you're really forced to reckon with it personally that you are confronted by the palpability of it. It's not until you talk to another person who shares your identity or even parts of it that you realize its extremity, that pain is believed and very much treated differently depending on who you are, even in a context meant to support everybody. And it starts with the literature that psychiatrist was obsessed with citing, because who exactly make up most of the focus in these Western studies? To wrap up my story, last summer I finally had enough of all the bullshit here, and since I'm really lucky enough to have had the money because I was still working, I decided to go out of the country to Boston to seek treatment from a neurologist there. I went twice, with the second time being an appointment with a head and pain specialist who ended up diagnosing me with a split pain condition called trigeminal and occipital neuralgia that basically speaks to conditions in which the trigeminal nerve, which is a cranial nerve that we have on each side here with branches out to the face, and the occipital nerve, which is a part of the set of nerves in the back of our head above our neck. And so these nerves have become inflamed and are essentially sending all sorts of pain signals to my brain. Why exactly did this happen? Unfortunately, the neurologist in Boston still couldn't tell me. Most often, neuralgia is caused by a head injury, which of course I didn't have, thankfully, but they say that in rare cases, the condition arises spontaneously. And so with that, the neurologist put me on a medication plan that, long story short, did not work, and that was to be supervised by my family doctor, who of course I don't have anymore, and I can no longer afford to go back to Boston. So there's that. So yeah, this more or less brings us to now. I'm trying really hard to climb out of what has probably been the darkest chapter of my life, dealing with all of this so far. A few weeks ago, after almost 2 years of trying my hardest to stay in the game and keep up appearances and trying to maintain enough income to pay for all my medical expenses, I finally decided to take a sick leave from work because I just wasn't functional anymore, despite the kindness and understanding of my employers who have accommodated me throughout all of this. My symptoms have just progressed to the point where, the painful spasms and contractions are no longer just, pain. They are causing my jaw and throat to lock, which is really scary. There have been many moments when I've contemplated taking my life, but especially last month. I actually don't even think it was much of a contemplation anymore as it was a resignation, because I wanted to give up. I really wanted to give up, and I still do. But you know what has pulled me out of thinking like that every single time? My mom, who I'm so lucky to have by my side through all of this. Literally, whenever I feel scared or I'm in too much pain, I sleep next to her and things don't feel so bad. Also, my sister and my friends. My best friend who cried on the phone with me when I was having all those bad thoughts and who told me how much she loved me and how much it would suck if I wasn't here. These people, my people, are why I'm still here. They are my strength. Not Ontario healthcare, not this country's fake kindness and bureaucratic tape and barriers. And believe me, it is not lost on me how fucking lucky I am. I have the people I just mentioned who are there for me through thick and thin, who, distract me from pain and remind me of the brightness of life. I live with my family, so I don't have to worry about the added expense and stress of rent through all this. The fact that I was able to work throughout most of this meant that I was able to finance seeking healthcare elsewhere. I'm not saying that the US is the standard at all. Their system is fucked. We know this. I'm just saying I had the option to do this instead of continuing to be waitlisted into oblivion like so many other folks are. So many people die on these wait lists. Even most recently being faced with the administrative barriers of navigating the federal employment insurance program. They make it so hard. You're literally at rock bottom doing this never-ending online application and, calling 5 different phone numbers. You know how you call one department and then they tell you to call another and then you call that department and so on. I had to physically go to a Service Canada location and waited hours with so many other folks there, to sort things out. Never mind, acquiring the necessary legal documentation. Throughout all of this, I just imagined being someone else who, might not have a support system or might not speak English as their first language or have a car to head across the city to Service Canada in the dead of winter, only to be told after lining up for 3 hours, sorry, you gotta come back another day. All of this, something has to change. And don't tell me there's no money for it, because there is. We pay for it. Let's talk about the approximate 13% of Canada's GDP that goes towards healthcare. That's about $300 billion annually. What are the subsections of healthcare that are the main focus of this expenditure? I'll tell you what's not. It certainly isn't staffing, as we know how severely understaffed hospitals and clinics are. Remember those wild ER and referral wait times I was talking about, or the lack of overnight emerge doc, or the shortage of family doctors? When people aren't compensated fairly, they don't show up the way that they're supposed to, both literally and figuratively. In terms of the latter, those that do physically show up are often overworked and frustrated at their circumstances. And all of this creates the perfect storm of long wait times, most urgently for those in need of critical life-saving care. It's also not being spent on expansive research and advanced technology that is essential in prevention that could eliminate some crisis situations entirely. Some provinces like Ontario have shortages in terms of, the medical technology we have. Again, this results in extended wait times and a triage-based system that of course prioritizes the most extreme cases, but it shouldn't even have to come to this. We're operating under an extremely fragile emergency model that lends itself mostly to symptom control as opposed to addressing root issues that could eliminate this need for crisis altogether. It's also not being spent on the education of medical professionals who right now are still being led by outdated beliefs and ways of practice. If you don't believe me, I encourage you to check out the study that I've linked in the description box that absolutely blew my mind when I first encountered it in my master's research. It's several years old by now, but still shockingly in our recent past. And it speaks to racial bias in Western healthcare specifically, but I think it's a perfect and also dangerous example of how deep colonial thinking still runs. There is still little cultural, gender, disability-specific understanding when it comes to treatment. Not to say that the system doesn't work against all of us. It does. I am just saying there are groups who are disproportionately affected. This is also why they say that representation matters, but it's bigger than just that. It's the governing umbrella. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. My Point of No Return is the name that I've given this project, as it mostly speaks to this idea of seeing and knowing too much that things can never really be the same for you anymore. It's a limit that you're pushed to, where you have no other choice but to transform. This is what this experience has been for me. Before I wrap up this video, I want to make one thing very clear. I am not ignorant to the fact that amongst this mess, there are real life healthcare superheroes. I know you're out there. I've encountered some of you on this journey. I want you to know how much you mean to me and so many others, because it's rough out here. You really are the change. But my point with this video is that the burden shouldn't be on individuals. It's on the decision and policymakers. It's on this pseudo-socialist system that still very much operates under a shit profit structure. If you've had a similar experience, please comment. I would absolutely love to hear from you. We can rant together, we can share resources, and I'll make sure to also research more about the situation in other provinces too, as I've heard many stories. I'm really sorry that I could only speak to Ontario here. I just really haven't had the capacity to expand my knowledge in the midst of still dealing with all my stuff. But I will, I promise. I'm only starting here because, like I said, this is the closest thing to me right now. But in the meantime, I gotta figure out my shit. It's all really scary with so much being uncertain still, but I'm a tough cookie. I really wasn't before, but this experience has made me one. But also, like I said, my support system is my rock. I hope I can be back here soon. I know that this first video might set a precedent about what else is to come with this project, and I absolutely will continue to scream from the mountaintops about this, but I'm a creative person in body, mind, and spirit, and I really want to get back to being creative and sharing that light with others as well. So yeah, you can also expect some more lighthearted content too in the future that I'm really excited about, that you can check out on my TikTok and Instagram at the same My Point of No Return handle that I'll link in the description box and at the end of this video. I'm sorry if this was information overload, but yeah, here is to My Point of No Return, which to me means using my voice and living my life authentically, passionately, creatively, because life really is too short and fragile not to. Till next time, bye.